They treat minority citizens, Harry, as if they are literally second-class citizens. In that, the argument is actually made that allowing for a requirement of a voter ID, which, by the way, is required, as Jordan said, in Maryland and Pennsylvania, and in Georgia, the voter ID could be a utility bill. But that requiring it a certain amount of days is just disproportionately unfair to the minority communities, as if they cannot follow the rules. That to me, that's the racial prejudice.
I think you're absolutely right, and it is a fundamentally racist idea. The Justice Department claims that the Georgia law is racist. Why? Simply because it changes the voting integrity rules in Georgia without the permission of elites in Washington. Instead of reviewing the Georgia law honestly and fairly and thoroughly, and instead of believing that African American voters are just as competent, the DOJ prefers to believe that any change in the law is racist and that African American voters are so fundamentally incompetent that they need the assistance of elites in Washington to figure it out, to get to the polls, to actually acquire sufficient voter ID items, such as a license or some other form of identification. I think at the end of the day, the approach that is taken by the DOJ harkens back to the history of the Democratic Party, unfortunately, where the Democratic Party specialized in voter suppression. And so while I would oppose all forms of voter suppression, whether it's coming from Democrats or Republicans, it's important to keep in mind that the history of Georgia is largely grounded, if we go back far enough, in Democrat Party politics. They include individuals like Josephus Daniels, who was the Secretary of the Navy in the Woodrow Wilson administration. He was an unreconstructed racist. He was an individual who tried to deprive African American voters of their right to vote quite successfully in the state of North Carolina. And guess who was his assistant secretary? None other than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So it's very, very important to look at the history of the Democratic Party and not be confused with respect to the history of the present-day Republican Party.